Well, good evening. We are continuing looking at the Proverbs, and remember this is part of our introduction to the wisdom literature in particular. We've looked at Job and Psalms, Proverbs. We have, looking through this, talked about where this fits in to the wisdom literature. I kind of call Proverbs, it's an invitation to wisdom. Remember, wisdom being what? Yeah. All right, skill in the art of godly living. So, just to kind of remind ourselves of these things, Proverbs are, all right, short sayings of wisdom, wise sayings to help us, and then we kind of see the structure of the book itself. Is all of it just individual little random sayings all the way throughout? No, there's some structure to it. Chapters 1 through 9 is an invitation to wisdom. Remember, it ends with the two banquets that are open. Who is giving a banquet? All right, Lady Wisdom, and who also is inviting people in? Lady Folly. One will provide life, the other will provide death. Which one do you want to enter into? So, as we looked last week, well, we talked about how, first of all, that the Proverbs, are they trying to give definitive, absolute, always types of statements? That this will always be the case? No. They're not trying to be exhaustive. They're just simply giving, what's the word we've been using? All right, caricatures, pictures that accentuate certain things. Remember we talked about the caricature of Conan O'Brien and how, yeah, you can look at that and you know who it is because it is accentuating, it's really emphasizing very specific things, right? But this is what he really looks like, as the case is. So that's what it is doing. And then last week we talked about how the Proverbs often actually work together. We looked at the illustration of Proverbs chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, in which each proverb does stand on its own. Yeah, it can. But when you piece them all together, what we find is that the same person, the wise son, is also the one who is righteous, who is diligent, who is prudent, right? On the other side, the foolish son is also the one who's wicked, who is lazy, and who is a shameful son. And so they're all reference of the same thing. There's co-referentiality that is taking place. So we discussed this, we talked about this. And as part of this discussion, I tried to point out here in these verses that if people followed this, what kind of a society would people have? Joshua says pretty good, right? Yeah, if everybody in this community was a wise, righteous, diligent, prudent individual, would the community flourish? Yeah, that would be an upbuilding for the community as a whole, if everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. What if you had a community full of foolish, wicked, lazy, shameful people? Would that community flourish? No, things would go poorly for it. Now, the one thing that I don't want to give the wrong impression is to say that all of Proverbs is about being diligent or lazy. Because that's not the case, right? That's just the case in these verses. And I just pulled out these 5 because it's an easy picture to see how verses work together. But the whole of Proverbs is not just simply about being diligent or being lazy, right? There's all kinds of stuff in there about wise living in all kinds of different arenas. And so all aspects of your life require wisdom in all aspects. It's not just about the individual, it's how the individual fits in with the rest of the community. And if everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing, whether it's with diligence, whether it's with finance, whether it's the way that they respond to the king, whether it's what they're doing in their home and how they're relating with their wife, how they're relating with their children, how they're relating with their bosses, or whatever the case, if whatever the realm is, if people act in the caricature of wisdom, the whole community will be better off. That's the picture. It's not just, Proverbs is not just about working hard or not working hard. Everybody understand what I'm saying? Yeah, I just want to make sure, because we just kind of blasted through that last week. I didn't want to give the impression that all of Proverbs is just this. In fact, we're going to now move our attention into new territory. But before we do, are there any questions or comments about anything that we've talked about in the last couple weeks? From anybody? Questions or comments or clarification? Anything else? All right. Well, let's move then to Proverbs chapter 31. Proverbs chapter 31 is where I'm going to conclude. And by the way, there's an awful lot of really good stuff in Proverbs. In no way, shape, or form am I saying, hey, we're hitting the highlights even, because there's such a vast wealth of knowledge, of wisdom that can be gained through the Proverbs. It is impossible for us just to do a brief, exhaustive study and even hit the highlights of the stuff that's talked about. So many Proverbs that are really good, so many helpful things. But I'm going to kind of skip to the end, Proverbs chapter 31, and we're going to start not in verse 10, but in verse 1. Proverbs chapter 31, and I'm going to read this out of the CSB just to see how it reads. Proverbs 31, verse 1. The words of King Lemuel, a pronouncement that his mother taught him. What should I say, my son? What? Son of my womb? What? Son of my vows? Don't spend your energy on women or your efforts on those who destroy kings. It is not for kings, Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine or rulers to desire beer. Otherwise he will drink, forget what is decreed, and pervert justice for all the oppressed. Give beer to the one who is dying and wine to the one whose life is bitter. Let him drink so that he can forget his poverty and remember his trouble no more. Speak up for those who have no voice, for the justice of all who are dispossessed. Speak up, judge righteously, and defend the cause of the oppressed and the needy. How many of y'all are familiar with this part of Proverbs 31? Really familiar with it? Some of you, all right. How many of y'all, when I said Proverbs 31, didn't even kind of realize that this even existed? Yeah, this gets overlooked, because if I asked you, what is Proverbs 31 about, what's your answer? The worthy woman. And that's a good answer. Don't get me wrong. It's characterized in that way frequently. I will frequently, if you just give one thought for Proverbs 31 and you're only allowed to say one phrase, a worthy woman, sure. You know, that's okay, as long as that's not the extent of our understanding and our knowledge of what's in Proverbs 31, because verses 1 through 9, I believe, are really important and really helpful. And even though these are whose words? Well, not yet, Connie. How does it say it? The words of, all right, King Lemuel, right? These are the words of King Lemuel. And you're like, oh, okay, we have the king's words here. That what? That his mother, and that's what Connie said just a second ago, these aren't his words. This isn't the wisdom of the king being handed down. This is the wisdom of the king that was gained from his mother. And I think it's important that we see that. Now, as we go through here, first of all, just very quickly, for those of you who remember your timelines, and we didn't cover this, so that's fair if you don't remember this, because as we went through the kings' accounts, we didn't specify and talk about each of the kings. But where does Lemuel and the kings of Israel, where does he fit in the chart? Anybody remember the dates for King Lemuel of Israel? Okay, no one's taken the bait on this one. I was waiting to see if anybody was, going to their king's chart. Now, was there a King Lemuel in Israel? No. And that's fascinating, isn't it? What that means is that the wisdom, and we would call it the inspired by God wisdom, handed down and given to Israel in here in Proverbs, is coming from where? An Israelite? It's not. This is coming from one of the pagans, I guess you could say, the uncircumcised, those outside of Israel. Remember how I said that wisdom was not something that Israel had a monopoly on in the ancient world. It's not like biblical wisdom is there and is so far different from everyone else. Back during this time, this type of wisdom was actually across the board. Wisdom. People thought in these kinds of ways, predominantly speaking. Not that everything was great, not that every society was perfect, but wisdom like this really kind of ruled the day. It doesn't today necessarily, as it once would have. But these are the words of somebody who is not an Israelite. So, verses 1 through 7, let's kind of just break this down very briefly before we dig into it. 1 through 7 is basically the mother telling Lemuel what? Okay, Joshua said that kings don't drink wine. In other words, these are the things that the king is not to do. These are the things that the king should not do. But then we have two more verses. What do they talk about? These are the things that the king should do. And really, this is kind of the breakdown. And when you look at this, what are the types of things that the king says, or the mother tells this king, his son, not to do? Joshua mentioned one. What was it, Joshua? All right, the king should not drink beer or wine. And don't go after women. Those are the two basic things that the mother is telling this man. And why is that? Say that again. All right, because it takes the king away from his real responsibility. He might get distracted and do what? What does she say? Verse 5. Okay, pervert justice. What were you saying, Julia? All right, forget what the laws really are, and then end up perverting justice for those who need justice. So that's what strong drink and strong women do. Now, let's read between the lines just a little bit here. I think it's okay to do so. I think because we have this mother who is talking these words to a king, I think we're invited to try to see a context here. What might be the context by which the mother imparts this wisdom upon this king? Yeah, Kevin? Okay, save that answer for a second. You answer my next question. So save that one for just 1 second. What might be the occasion, though? Say that again, Josie. When he becomes king. All right, I think this might be wisdom from a mother being handed down to this new king as he is taking the throne as king. Now, if we're going to assume that this is the wisdom being given to him as he becomes king, what does that mean about the last king? Is he still king? No, he's dead at this point, which then goes to what Kevin said. Why is this helpful for this mother to give this information to this king? And now, Kevin? All right, Kevin said, maybe these are the two areas in which this king's father, her husband, failed. Is it possible that she has seen firsthand what happens when a king gives himself into what? Wine and women. Strong drink and women. What happens? He gets what? Okay, he loses sight of God, but he loses sight of his duties, his responsibilities. He ends up perverting justice. Maybe this wisdom comes from a woman who has seen firsthand because her husband was someone who went after wine, strong drink, women, and got himself distracted with all these other things. And now she says to him, you know what? She's now saying to the son, the new king, stay away from this stuff. This will only lead to failure. Yeah, Miranda? Is it possible this is a eulogy? There's nothing here that sets that up, that is presenting it in that way. This is all about how he is going to rule. Yeah, I mean, anything's possible, but again, I don't see anything that invites us to necessarily see that. We're going to talk about the transition. Miranda talked about the rest of Proverbs and how that transition goes from 9 to 10 in just a few minutes. But if this is a firsthand experience from this woman who has seen her husband totally mess it up and says, basically, don't be like your dad, which I think is what's happening here. Don't be like him. What does she say to do? What's that? All right. Speak up for those who are destitute. In other words, speak up for the ones who what? Who are oppressed. The ones who have no voice of their own. Be the voice for the ones who don't have a voice. I think that's really what is taking place here as she's saying, don't pervert justice. Don't be the cause of their oppression. Don't forget the laws that are decreed, and by so doing, put other people down. Instead, take the people who are down and raise them up and be their voice for them. Is that fair with what you see from verses 1 through 7, followed up by verses 8 and 9? All right, so let's talk about some of these particulars here. Don't drink the strong drink because otherwise he will drink Forget what's decreed, pervert justice for the oppressed. Verse 6, give beer to the one who's dying, wine to the one whose life is bitter. Let him drink, so that he can forget his poverty and remember his trouble no more. So, is this then, from the wisdom literature, is this from the Proverbs inspired by God, is this then making allowances for alcohol to be those who are in the place of the oppressed, and that it's good for those so that they can forget their troubles? What do you think? That's what she says, right? Give it to the ones who, are in need in that way. Let them drink to forget their poverty and their misery. By the way, is she talking about medicinal qualities here? Is this a take it for your stomach's sake? No, that's not what's under discussion here. This isn't a medicinal type of thing. This is these people need an escape from reality. Let them drink to escape their reality. It's right here in the Holy Scriptures, right? So what do you think? Yeah, Dave?
Those who overindulge, those who use it to excess, their lives are dissipated. Their lives are ruined.
Okay, so a statement of hyperbole maybe is kind of the idea. All right, so with this hyperbole that she's saying that these people, say that again?
They're not living productive lives. They're not living happy lives. They're just trying to escape from reality, as you said. So it's not a place anybody wants to be or should want to be.
All right, so basically telling the king, you don't want to have anything to do with this. These are people who are ruining their lives. Am I catching what you're saying with that? Okay. All right, very good. Anybody want to add to that or another thought on this? Mike, did you start to put a hand up a second ago? No. Okay. All right. So, remember the question, is this giving an allowance? Is this the Holy Spirit saying, yeah, it's okay for people in that position to do that? Yeah, Mike, did you have your hand up? Did you want to? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So Mike said maybe it's, and by the way, it kind of goes with this, right? The idea of the hyperbolic, they're running their lives type of a thing. But he says, this is the way that people act when they're in that desperate kind of situation. And if they're in that desperate kind of situation, is she talking to those people? No, she's not. She's not giving them allowance or talking to them. It's not even a part of the equation. She's just saying those are the people who do this type of thing. But are you the king or are you one of those people? That's the question. And that's what you're basically saying, Mike, right? That, you're not in that state. She says you're not in a position where you have poverty, where you have oppression, where you're at the lowest of the low. Maybe you might understand someone that's in that position doing it, but not you. You have no business doing this because that doesn't describe you. Does that make sense? You know, again, this isn't an allowance that says, hey, go willy-nilly. She's not talking, she's not giving liberty to people who are in that position. She's not talking to them. She's talking to the one who has a voice. And if you have a voice, then this applies. And if you have a voice, what does she say? Don't waste it, Julia says. If you have a voice, don't waste it. Don't waste it going after booze. Don't waste it going after women or whatever the case is. Don't waste it finding yourself in a position where you are oppressing those who desperately need you to help. Because this is what the king is supposed to do. The king is placed in power for what purpose? So that he can change things, Olivia says. Very good, yep. Why are governors, rulers, and authorities in place? Yeah, because the Lord wanted them to be, right? All right, remember, Paul talks about this, doesn't he? Romans chapter 13. Rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good. You will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Verse 5, therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. Therefore, pay your taxes. And then goes through there. Doesn't Paul weigh in on this idea about what the authorities are there to do? Their stated purpose is for the good, not for the bad, to help those who are doing what is right. They are to take care of the ones who are being oppressed by others, by the wrongdoers. So, all of this plays into this conversation as the mother speaks to this brand new king. How does this apply to us? Who here thinks you're going to be a king one day? Yeah. Not very many of us probably have the bloodlines for that, right? Probably won't have those opportunities. If you do, that means that situations have changed drastically from what they are currently. And there's been some kind of major collapse. If Isaac is ever the king, a lot of bad things will have had to have happened before that point, right? I say that because Isaac raised his hand a second ago and said, yeah, he thought maybe he might be a king one day. Yeah. I don't think any of us are in this situation. So how is this applicable? Yeah, Kevin? All right, Kevin says we all influence somebody. In other words, we all have a what? Say it again. We all have a voice. If we have a voice, if we can be heard. I'm not talking about being able to project a voice. I'm saying if we, the word that Kevin used, the word influence, if we have the opportunity to influence in any kind of a way, this is applicable. Or applicable, however you want to say it. I've heard it both ways. So, what do we get from it? First of all, what not to do with your voice? Use it to chase women. Very good. Remember that one. Joshua. Overall, though, what was it? The chasing women, chasing the booze, all of that, what was that? All right, use it for evil. What'd you say, Dave? Don't waste it. Don't squander it. And by the way, I'm going to jump up on a soapbox here, if you will allow it. Not that you have too much of a choice, because I'm the one with the microphone. But there's been a word that's gotten a lot of attention in the last, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think it's important that we make sure we understand this word properly. That word is privilege. How many of y'all have heard the word privilege? And, and there were some things going around. I saw it on Facebook and some other things about how privilege is a concept that doesn't apply to certain individuals because they grew up poor. They were dirt poor growing up, and they didn't have privilege because in a lot of people's minds, oh boy. Is that right? Spell checkers? Okay, all right, very good. In a lot of people's minds, privilege is intricately tied to wealth. And therefore, people who have wealth, are those who are privileged, and without wealth, you're not. What is privilege? Anybody know what privilege itself is? Advantage, yes. Yeah, it certainly is advantage. I was hoping some of my boys might pipe out here. Something you haven't earned? No. I was thinking more Terry Pratchett, talks about this. Yeah, Kevin, were you going to say something before? Okay, opportunity, advantage. But Kelly, say that again really, really loudly. All right, if you break down the word privilege, it's kind of a combination, I think, from the Latin. Private law. You see the private and then the legal, aspect. Private law. That is that there is one set of law that exists for one person, but then other people have their own law that exists for them. That is privilege, right? Now, why is it, I erased it. Why is it attached to wealth very frequently? Because the wealthy what? All right, the wealthy can usually afford their own law. The wealthy are usually able to use their wealth in order to create a system by which they are judged differently. But that's not the only thing that privilege comes down to. Sometimes privilege is something that is given, advantage or opportunity, that you work under a separate law, sometimes just because your skin color is different from somebody else's skin color. And whether you are dirt poor or a millionaire is completely irrelevant in the scenario when you walk into a store and people immediately assume something about you and they're going to treat you differently based on the color of your skin. And what does it mean if someone treats you differently? They've given you a what? They've given you a different law that you are living by. A different set of standards by which you're being judged. That somebody with white skin can walk in, pick things up, walk around with them or whatever in a store, no big deal. Somebody with a different color skin can come in, pick things up, and they've got the monitors watching this person carefully. Because there's a different law in place for some people based on the color of skin. Now, sometimes it has to do with socioeconomic situations. Sometimes if someone comes in with tattered clothing, certain judgments are made. What do we call these judgments, by the way, that are made without any evidence? Prejudice, right? Prejudgments is prejudice. I didn't know I was going to be talking about this, so I didn't look up the words beforehand. Is that one right? Am I good still? You have no idea how hard it is to spell when writing on a whiteboard. There's something different about a whiteboard that just really messes with you. Prejudice, though, runs along the idea of privilege. And you prejudge based on this factor, this factor, this factor, or this factor. Yeah, sometimes it's wealth. Sometimes somebody who's wealthy is given the benefit of the doubt when someone who is dirt poor is not going to be given that benefit of the doubt, right? It's a different law. Sometimes it has to do with the color of your skin. Somebody with white skin is going to be given the benefit of the doubt when someone with a different skin color is not going to be. We need to, though, make sure that we're understanding what we're talking about when it comes to privilege. Because when it comes right down to it, Proverbs 31, verses 1 through 9, is applicable to anybody who finds themselves in a scenario or in a situation where they have a voice that other people do not have. And when you're in that position, this is speaking to you. And this is telling you, what are we supposed to do with the voice that we're given? You don't what? You don't waste it. Instead, you use it for whose benefit? God's, yes, but God is happy when you use it for the benefit of yourself, for others, particularly those who don't have that privilege, for those who are oppressed, for those who are pushed down. That's why it's incumbent upon us to understand, first of all, the privilege that we do have, the privileges that we do share, the opportunities to see those opportunities, and then to be the voice that we should be. Does that make sense? All right, so I'll jump off my soapbox here. Then, I kind of got on it. Like I said, I didn't fully intend necessarily to go down that route. But I think it makes sense when we're talking about this that's given to this king and how these things are applicable for us as well. Open your mouth for the one who can't speak. And by the way, does that mean find mute people somewhere who aren't able to speak and go around with them and let them write things down so that you can speak and be their voice? Is that what he's saying? No, this is metaphoric. For the ones who, metaphorically speaking, have no voice, be their voice. When they are pushed down, be the one that stands amongst the others and says, hey, this is wrong. We need to do better. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. All right. Any more comments or questions from verses 1 through 9 from anyone? Okay. All right. So, the rest of Proverbs 31 then begins, verse 10, an excellent wife who can find. She is more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. And so then you have all of this that is discussed through here, all of these things that the Proverbs 31 woman does. Now I call this the Aleph Beit of womanly excellence because this is a what? I'm sure you guys know this. Or this is an acrostic, a type of Hebrew poetry in which they have words or phrases that start with what? All right, each of the letters of their alphabet. or their Aleph Beit is, the first two letters of their alphabet. So, to whom is this written? Okay, so Julia says it could be continued words of the mother of Lemuel, right? Have we seen a distinctive change at this point? You see it before. Chapter 30, the words of Agur, son of Yakeh, the oracle. And then all the way through there. And then you have the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. So you get down to verse 10, and the question then becomes, and this is a really good question, are we reading the continued words of King Lemuel that were given from his mother? Miranda earlier brought up this idea, maybe this is connected, that this is talking about, maybe Miranda said, this mother herself, that she was this kind of worthy woman, a woman of excellence, as the case might be. We don't know. There's not a definitive answer. And believe me, I've read a lot looking through this, trying to determine this question, because there was a translation assignment in one of the classes where I had to go through and answer these types of questions. So, looking through this, plenty of people say it definitely is. And then plenty of people say, well, no, there's such an abrupt change that takes place here. Stylistically, it's completely different. It's a poem. It's not written the same way. There's nothing that connects them, so there's no reason to accept it as such. I wish I had a better answer for you to say definitively one way or the other. I happen to lean away from it being the continued words, but I would not be surprised if we found out in some way something came up and it turned out that it was absolutely just a tack on from more words of Lemuel from his mother. Now, to whom was it written? This is the great irony, by the way, of Proverbs 31, and by that I mean verses 10 through 31. Who studies Proverbs 31? Women. Not a trick question. Overwhelmingly, Proverbs 31 is studied by women. Gentlemen, how many times have you had a class that was specifically devoted to studying Proverbs 31? Anyone? Maybe some of you old-timers, did that happen back in the day? Nobody's answering. Nobody's like, I want to admit I'm an old-timer. Yeah. No, it doesn't happen. How many of you ladies have ever had a class or a series of classes or whatever on Proverbs 31? Put your hands up. All right. Take a look at that. Most hands just went up. To whom is this written? This is written to men. All right, this is not written to women. And I think it's important that we understand that fact, because the very first phrase is what? What is it? Go ahead and read it. Someone read it. An excellent wife who can find. This is very specifically about trying to find the right woman. And how do you find the right woman? This is not a woman's Bible class statement. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Can you study this as women, and is it helpful? 100%. Absolutely. I'm just wondering, though, if we're missing something by the fact that it really is relegated to women's Bible studies and it doesn't get a lot of play otherwise. We don't do men's studies on Proverbs 31 specifically for men in the looking for a wife eventually types of ages, and yet that is its primary purpose and its primary focus. So, if it is written for the purpose of men, how should a woman make application of this? Go ahead, ladies. It's okay. How should a woman make application? Okay. This is describing the type of woman that a godly man should be looking for. If you're a woman, make the necessary changes. What is this? How does this help you? What does it show you? Okay, let me try this again. I'm not trying. This is like low-hanging fruit. All right? I'm not looking for depth here. You don't have to think about this. This is telling men what kind of woman a godly man should look for. What is it telling women? The kind of woman that a godly woman should be, right? All right, do you see that? I'm not there. You guys, were you guys like way overthinking it? Or, I don't know, I don't understand. I thought that was going to be just a really, really simple answer. How should a woman make application? But here is the important thing to remember about trying to study and apply Proverbs 31. The Proverbs are all about creating what kind of pictures? Caricatures. And so when you study Proverbs chapter 31, is this telling you specifically what a godly woman looks like? Absolutes, emphatics. It is not. And I think a lot of studies by women on Proverbs 31 make the mistake of saying, okay, guys, it's time for us to get out our checklist. What's the first thing? There we go. And what else does a woman have to be? It has to be this, and a woman has to be this, and it has to be this. And then you keep on going, and you provide all of these things, and you say, okay, ladies, how many of y'all can check off every one of those things? None of you? Well, we've got work to do then. We should check off every single one. And if we treat Proverbs 31 like that, we have grossly missed the point of what Proverbs 31 is trying to accomplish. It's not about telling you or commanding this is what you have to be. It's showing gentlemen like these gentlemen up here a picture, a caricature. It's not even a real picture, by the way. Are caricatures real pictures? It's not even a real picture. It's an accentuated picture with these accentuated pieces, and says she would be the type of lady that if she ever got into business, this is what it would look like. Or the type of lady that if she ever found herself at home with kids, this is kind of what it would look like. Or if she was ever doing this and taking care of things, this is kind of what it would look like. This is not trying to create a picture of a woman that is absolutely impossible for anyone to be. And the minute that we try to study, ladies, Proverbs 31 in such a way that you have a checklist that says if you haven't checked them all off yet, then you are less than, then you're creating an impossible picture that the Proverbs author is not trying to create for you. That's not the point. It's to say, generally speaking, if a woman is doing this, this is kind of what it looks like. If a woman, she will do good and not harm for her husband. If she were to go out and seek the wool, the flax, and she would work with willing hands. Like the ships of a merchant. If she finds herself in that situation. She'd be the type that would be able to get things from even afar, as the case is. She's the type of person that if the need arises, she'll even arise while it's still night in order to provide food for her household. And she'll take care of the people who are her servants in her house. This doesn't say, ladies, that you have to get out of bed while it's still dark. But it does say that this is the type of person that if that were necessary, she'd do it. Am I making sense here? And by the way, I haven't sat through these studies because I'm a guy and not a lady, and I'm not allowed in the classes that do these. I'm basing this off of some general statements, things that I've heard, things expressed, and guesses as to how this is often typically studied and how it's often looked at. But here is the thing about Proverbs 10 through 31. I'm not going to take the time to go through all of this, but I'm fairly convinced there's a chiastic structure. What's a chiasm again? Y'all remember that? Where the ideas go in and then they come back out, right? You guys remember this type of a structure poetically? If Proverbs 31 is actually a chiasm or chiasm, the very central point of this is in verse 23. Remember, the central point is the point where the emphasis is. This is the most important aspect. And what do you find in verse 23? Her husband what? All right. The key fundamental thing about this worthy woman and finding a worthy woman or an excellent woman, look for this woman as someone who's looking for someone. What you're looking for is the kind of woman that is behind a great man, right? Because every great man that's ever existed, they will tell you, behind every great man is what? An even greater woman. And there's so much truth to that. The only reason that a man is able to take the time to sit as a judge and one of the elders at the gates and do everything that's a part of that is because behind him is a wife that he trusts with absolute 100% confidence that whatever needs to be done is going to be done. Whatever has to happen is going to happen. And by this point in time, if he's sitting down as one of the wise elders at the gates, that means that as a couple, they have already proven themselves in wisdom, in the raising of their children, in their finances, and this and that, or whatever the case is. What he's finding is a partner. She doesn't do it on her own. They do this together. And in the end, he is honored to be one of the elders at the gates who sits and is there because of the choice that he made for the woman that he chose so many years ago. Look for that woman so that you can sit in the place of the elders of God's people. That, I believe, is the brilliance of Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 through 31. Questions or comments on any of that or anything else that we talked about? Now's your chance, because we're going to move into Ecclesiastes next week, so. Okay. All right. Well, we need to draw this then to a close. We're actually, I think, a couple minutes over. We don't have any new announcements for this evening, so we're going to go ahead and just conclude with a prayer together. And then after the prayer, we will be dismissed. So let's pray. Our Father in heaven, you are indeed holy and perfect and righteous. And you are perfect in so many ways, even when we are not. And yet, you still have blessed us with, well, even just the ability to have wisdom, to understand knowledge, to know how to live skillfully in such a way that will bring you glory and honor. Help us, because we desperately desire to serve you and to honor you. Help us to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, that we can see the opportunities before us to stand up for the rights of others, to stand up to help them when they are unable to help themselves. And for these young men, help them to look for women who are going to be those women who, I don't want to use the word helper because of some of the connotation that's involved with it, but you know what I'm referring to, just that they will find women who will be stronger than them and who will help them to be better men. And that these women will indeed be the women who will be that aid, that help, that strength to their husbands in the future. And help us all in our relationships. Help us all to be those people who will glorify you. We love you. We thank you for every blessing that we have. Especially we thank you for your Son, for the hope of that perfected heaven that comes through him. And it's through Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, thanks a lot, guys.